There's been a lot of talk recently about how the modern demon list has been ruined. Whether it's due to the devolution of gameplay, legendary levels falling to the legacy list, or controversial guideline changes, it seems that nearly everyone is unhappy for different reasons. While the community is unable to pinpoint one specific characteristic that differentiates the current list from the one a few years ago, the root of Pointercrate's downfall can easily be traced back to the actions of one notorious player. One of the most glaring issues the community has with modern list demons is the prioritization of difficulty over playability. Not every list demon does this, but every single offender sticks out like a sore thumb. A clear indicator of a level being buffed to an unnecessary degree is the use of fixed hitboxes. The hitboxes of spikes and saw blades are almost always smaller than their respective objects. RobTop designed these objects this way to grant players with a larger margin of error than they believe is present. This dead space in these objects gives difficult levels a more sinister appearance by making the gaps look tighter than they actually are. More importantly, however, it prevents the game from getting too difficult. A smaller spike or an invisible saw blade can easily bypass the safety measure by fixing the hitbox to the height, length, or diameter of a desired object. Creating a level with purposely fixed hitboxes was heavily frowned upon just a few short years ago. Levels such as Tartarus and Crimson Planet used fixed hitboxes to try to push the skill ceiling to new heights. Although they both succeeded in doing so, they were each met with a fair amount of backlash. The overwhelmingly negative response to fixed hitboxes sent a crystal clear message to both creators and verifiers. However, not everyone got the memo. Avernus was not the first level to introduce anything, really. It's about as original as any other hell-themed remake of a former top demon. What Avernus did do, however, was make the community realize that a new era of Geometry Dash had been entered. The era of the top player playground. Throughout the last 3 years, we've seen countless examples of top demon verifications getting buffed to click patterns, being riddled with fixed hitboxes, and even featuring extremely high CPS waves, all because it's funny. What this funny really does is artificially inflate the difficulty of the demon list to benefit the few players who are talented enough to keep up. The top 0.001% of players are all in agreement that this artificial ascent of the skill ceiling is good for the game, but that completely ignores the rest of the community who will only suffer because of this. Another way this top player has ruined the demon list is through a consistent lack of honesty. Players have lied about their attempt counts for as long as the game has been around. However, certain top players did their best to crack down on this and set a good example for the community. That era has unfortunately long passed, and today's top players all have an extensive history of lying. Geometry Dash's single-player nature is what allows players of all skill levels to get away with this. There's no competing directly against someone else, and there's no public database showing how much time someone has truly spent on a level. Attempt lying is as easy as playing on a separate copy or saying you forgot about 30k attempts from 2 months ago. I'd be willing to bet that at least 60% of the top 100 players on the stats viewer have lied about an attempt count within the last 3 months. Lying about doing a deep run to 100 is as easy as saying a number that people typically play from on that level. If someone asks for proof, just say that Shadowplay messed up and you don't have a recording. Lying about a level's difficulty is the easiest of them all, but also the most damaging. We've seen top levels get robbed of the #1 spot on the list because of an overwhelming ego. We've also seen verifiers consistently underrate their verifications by dozens of spots. The thing about attempt lying is that it's very easy to get away with if you do it consistently. Lying about difficulty is entirely different because people tend to catch on after a while. As a level gets more and more victors, the sample size eventually becomes large enough to offset that one outlier opinion. Over time, a level will move to its correct spot on the list, but that doesn't undo the negative effects it has on other levels and other players. I've personally been a victim of playing a newly placed list demon that ended up being 31 spots underrated. Spending weeks on a level that you should be able to get through comfortably is a genuinely terrible feeling. I can't even imagine how the players who got an unbelievable achievement stripped from them feel. In a community that is entirely built upon trust, it seems that the most influential players are often the least honest. In a way, you could argue that this top player used his status to fully take advantage of the demon list. We've actually seen multiple top players bend the rules of Pointercrate in extremely creative ways. For example, top players have beaten list demons on unofficial LDMs that slightly nerfed the level, only for the record to still stand. It's not outlandish to assume that a less influential player would have been told to rebeat it. Can you imagine if Little Jimmy with 100 subscribers beat Eternal Moment on the LDM that allows you to take a skip? There's a non-zero chance that his Pointercrate account would have been temporarily banned on the spot. Even though Geometry Dash is a single player game, a top player getting away with breaking the rules on multiple occasions has significant effects on the other players as well. In this case, exposing vulnerabilities in Pointercrate's guidelines has led other players to push the limits of what's really allowed. We saw this happen the most in 2023 and 2024 when the list grinding community felt the effects of multiple events that permanently changed the trajectory of our community. One of the more influential events from this time period was the release of Update 2.2. RopTop changed the physics of nearly every game mode in this update, which instantly broke dozens of list demons. Prior to December 19th, 2023, playing on a private server wasn't an issue that Pointercrate was concerned about. The most controversial type of completion from 2.1 was beating a level on an external LDM or start position copy. However, once the update was released and many levels were impossible, the list team also had to juggle completions on bug fixes, the 2.1 GDPS, normal 2.2 completions, 2.2 verifications, and eventually the controversial click between frames mod. The events that took place in 2023 and 2024 ended up completing a circuit of power trips between top players that started way back in 2022. The TLDR of these rule bends is that players have been beating top levels on nerfed LDMs, players have beaten top levels on controversially won JD tournaments by playing on private servers, and players have added CBF blockers to their top demon verifications both prior to and after their level was verified. In every single one of these cases, Pointercrate had to make a ruling that directly benefited one of the players involved and directly or indirectly hurt the other player involved. In May of 2026, it's impossible to come to a conclusion on who wins this morality battle because there are so many cases of the rules being bent. What we can agree on is that this constant rule permutation favoring certain players is the direct result of one player proving that the list team can easily be deceived for multiple years. Looking at a more indirect threat to the list, another fault of this top player is normalizing jumping. Jumping in Geometry Dash refers to committing to a level that is multiple echelons of difficulty harder than your current hardest level. We've seen quite a few anomalies jump over many tiers of difficulty and go on to be top players. Where this specific scenario differs is that it was the number one player who successfully completed a jump. Any community is going to replicate what the number one player or team is doing. That's just simply how metas form. You look at who's on top and assume that what they are doing is the most effective tactic available. In order to fully understand how this affects the list, I'm going to have to explain the entire issue surrounding jumping. The main issue with jumping for the general community is that it often doesn't work. Committing tens or even hundreds of thousands of attempts into a level that is far beyond your skill range can go terribly wrong if you don't have the genetics for it. The top players who have jumped were only successful because they were able to instantly acclimate to levels of a similar difficulty to their new hardest demon. What a lot of people don't understand is that this is the exception, not the rule. There are countless examples of people who have jumped to a level and then continued to struggle on easier levels. A huge part of this is genetics, which we can also call talent, but another part of this is skill set. If your hardest demon is Windy Landscape and you jump to every end, you're still going to have the ship and wave skills of someone who has never beaten an extreme demon. Where this ties into the demon list is that jumping heavily skews your perception of difficulty. For a lot of people, it permanently disables their difficulty gauge. When they move on to other levels of similar difficulty, one of two scenarios typically takes place. The first is that they find the other levels significantly easier than the one they jumped to. When people jump to a level, they're going to remember how hard it felt for them throughout their entire journey. This includes the large period of time when they couldn't do more than a 10% run on said level. If they then go on to play another level of the same skill set and same difficulty, they're probably not going to struggle nearly as much as they did with the level they jumped to. If a list mod asks about their difficulty opinions, they're probably going to say that the level they jumped to is underrated. Zodiac, Unknown, Firework, and Wazaretta are a few examples of levels that were overrated on the demon list, at least partially due to their jumpers. All of those levels have been jumped to countless times, and the jumpers didn't have an accurate difficulty placement. The second scenario is that someone jumps to a level that contains a very specific skill set. If someone follows the beaten path and jumps to Wazaretta, non-click sync levels are going to feel impossible unless they have top player genetics. The player will not only have an inaccurate difficulty opinion on Wazaretta, but also on the levels around it. Difficulty opinions are, and always will be, subjective. There is no right or wrong on the demon list because everyone has different genetics and different experiences. However, if jumpers start to overpower the normal progressors, these anomaly difficulty opinions will eventually become the norm. Top players are good enough to beat high-end extreme demons as one of their first demons, but it doesn't set a good example for the rest of the community. Another way this player impacted the demon list is by verifying levels that should not have been beaten. That's a pretty broad statement, so let's break this one into pillars. The first pillar of this verification is that it used to be seen as humanly impossible. A lot of people think that nerfing impossible levels to get them verified and rated removes the level's aura. While this may be true, it's better than publishing a level that was made to be past the human limit. Before anyone says anything, this is different from verifying verifying an ordinary top 1. There's a huge difference between verifying a level that's meant to be the hardest level that can be beaten, and verifying a level in its unnerved state that was once made to be impossible. The first issue that comes with this is something we touched upon earlier. Maybe there's one player out there who can do the impossible. Maybe there are then 2 or 3 other players who can beat the same level once the illusion that it's possible is present. For the remaining 99.9% repeating of list grinders, this is the worst case scenario. Unnaturally raising the skill ceiling is a surefire way to get some unplaytested impossible levels on the list and leave everyone else in the dust. Worst of all is that the rest of the top playing community would have gotten to this skill level eventually. It would have taken several years longer, but the levels on the list would be better and the very top wouldn't be run by really just one actual player. There would undoubtedly be some new faces at the top of the stats viewer if this one player wasn't so far ahead. Who knows how many people have given up because they can't keep up with the acceleration of the skill ceiling. One concrete example is when this player swooped in and essentially stole the spotlight on an open verification. The purpose of an open verification is for anyone to be able to verify it, so the verification itself wasn't technically stolen. However, this player picked up the impossible level that someone else had been working on and beat it significantly faster than the other verifier could have dreamed of. After time, the level got rated and now sits on the demon list, tormenting anyone and everyone who attempts to go for it. The second pillar of this verification is its unplay-tested nature. Impossible levels aren't made with the intention of anyone playing them. The creator does not spend any time thinking about whether the level would be fair or fun to play. When there's one player who's good enough to plow through anything, these unplay-tested levels end up on the list. People have always been drawn to beating the levels that have the most aura. That title will never not belong to a level that was once seen as beyond the human limit. Whereas any former top 1 will be painstakingly difficult, impossible levels will be blatantly unfair. The number 1 player of any era may be good enough to manage the choke points, bugs, bad transitions, and blind clicks in the hardest level, but the rest of the community is not equipped to deal with that. Over time, the level's difficulty relative to the skill ceiling will decrease, but its quality will not increase. It doesn't matter if a former top 1 is still in the top 10 or on the legacy list, its unplaytested features are just as frustrating as they were when it was verified. The real issue is that this sets the precedent that it's fine to verify unplaytested levels as long as it'll end up on the list. This starts with the top levels, but over time it slowly trickles its way down the list until list demons of all difficulties are riddled with poor playtesting. This leads me into the third and final pillar of this notorious verification, which is the devolution of gameplay. Top 1s have an unbelievable amount of influence on the future of list demons. For the longest time, the hardest levels played like any other level, but harder. Back in 2017, there were even some discussions about whether top demons needed to start becoming longer in order to prevent the base gameplay from getting too difficult. Fast forward a few years, and now those levels are the exception rather than the rule. We went from long levels with beautiful progression to straight up challenge gameplay. One player changed the meta for creating top demons overnight. Without this verification, we wouldn't be in the era of fixed hitboxes and 10 CPS wave spams in top demons. Despite how it sounds, Pointercrate's downfall isn't the result of one player pushing the limits and everyone else failing to keep up. There's one more crucial part of the story. In fact, the biggest offense of the current number 1 player is something that wasn't even his fault. Being the number 1 player comes with great responsibility because the entire playing community is resting on your shoulders. You are supremely in charge of influencing the future direction of top level play and subsequently many easier levels of play as well. The combination of your work ethic and your skill set is the sole determinant of how this game evolves. Or is it? Reaching the top of any leaderboard is a simple yet impossible task. Your only objective is to beat everyone and everything standing in your way. In a game like Geometry Dash, this includes the hardest levels, the most unconventional gameplay, the most talented players, and in some cases, an unstoppable force. In other games, it's quite clear when this force is indeed unstoppable. You have aimbots in shooters, macros in fighting games, and world-class adaptive AI bots in Rocket League. These types of games all require that you meet face-to-face with the illegal modifications, and it's often quite obvious when someone else is playing dirty. In Geometry Dash, however, it's just you and your icon. You can't see what your main competition is doing. You can't feel the effects of their playing methods. You are largely unable to determine infractions of the game's competitive integrity by yourself. So what happens if you don't know that your opponent is truly unstoppable? Well, you push even harder. With great talent comes great power. With great power comes great responsibility. With great responsibility comes thousands of people willing to throw you under the bus and frame you for someone else's actions. This one player has stepped on countless grenades that were thrown several years ago by someone else's decision. One operational error left someone in the position to permanently alter the game's trajectory, but everyone looks down upon the main beneficiary. How much of the demon list downfall is actually caused by the person who sits at the top? And how many of today's problems are the result of the player who was not even playing? Oh my God! My name is Tria, and that's how Space UK ruined the demon list.